roadway, baby, coming to your town. Wrap myself around you, push you down. I'm a roadway, baby.
I was born in Altadena, California, in a hospital that's no longer there on Lake Avenue. And my parents lived in a little valley to the north of Lake Avenue that now is, who knows what it is, but it was actually, after World War II, was had factories and a railroad that came all there. So the first house I grew up in literally had a railroad track right next to it. So I was born a poor white child by the railroad tracks in Altadena, California, and my parents, they loved to go to the beach and party. They were skiers. They hit Mount Baldy a lot, and there's some old home movies of them skiing. They were pretty good. But they particularly liked to go to Agate Street in Laguna, where the Spigot liquor store, I think it was built in like 1938, something like that. And they had just turned 21, so you could go. There was no surf and sand, and there was a Denny's there, maybe. I don't know for sure. That's where a Denny's used to be. And they would, party at the beach, glass bottles, fire pit, just build a fire on the beach in Laguna, drink out of glass beer bottles, do whatever you want. And my mom cleaned my diapers at Agate Street when I was a little baby, and I learned to go in and out with the surf at Agate Street. And then my parents got a divorce, and my mom would... I had an Aunt Mary that would regularly take us to, she lived in Seal Beach, and she was a retired school teacher. And in first and second grade, I was kind of mildly dyslexic and couldn't read very well. And every summer I'd go spend the summer with her for a week, and then I'd beg to stay a second week, and then I'd beg to stay a month, and I'd spend all my summers down at Seal Beach and with my Aunt Mary. And an amazing place at the time. It was just they'd put in the curbs and they'd put in the sidewalks, and they were all buckled, and just sand and those perennial purple flowers and a lot of vacant lots. It's all single-story units, no double-storied units. And I met the Bell sisters, Wendy Bell. She was the littlest of the Bell sisters, and they had a song called 26 Miles Across the Sea. Santa Catalina is waiting for me. And they had recorded it, and then a group called the Four Preps had heard it and stole it from them and made it kind of a minor hit in Southern California, and there went the Bell Sisters' big hit. But Wendy Bell and I, we would go fishing and off the pier, and then in the evening, this is back in the day, you know, I'm 7, 8, 9, and 6, 7, 8, 9 actually. They just let me wander around back in the day, and I wandered down and I discovered where the Crab's Jetty is. And I don't know if the Crab's Jetty was there or not then, but that's the first time I saw surfing, down at Ray Bay. And I was immediately mesmerized. And I immediately knew what I wanted to do the rest of my life. And there were girls there, and I remember I could still have this image of this one girl who was wearing a long sleeve, gray, athletic sweatshirt. No big deal today, but back then that was like wearing a Madonna bra with tassels coming out of the boobies. That was underwear, and that was only jocks and only weightlifters wore it, and weightlifters were yogurt-eating health nut people anyway. So it was very radical fashion statement that these early girls and early guys were making down there. Surfers started making the styles before they even knew they were doing it. Pendletons came a little bit later. And the Pendletons came, well, because it was cold in the winter. You know, you just kind of dressed for success when it's freezing cold. But then I started surfing in Seal Beach at Ray Bay, and by far everybody was a kook. The water was super, super warm because of the Ray Bay, and everybody was a kook, except there was one guy, Mike Haley. Jack Haley. Jack Haley was an amazing surfer. He was the first really great surfer that I saw. I still have a mental image in my mind of him taking off on the long jetty, the 72nd Street jetty on the Ray Bay side, him taking off on a good 2-3 foot overhead peak and just chasing it to the bottom and just making the most graceful bottom turn and coming up and then cutting back. And I knew that's what I wanted to do. So I learned how to surf. Riding the wax on your board would get all sticky and melt, and a million people out there because it was just so warm in the middle of the winter. And wetsuits were just so funky back then. They were basically beaver tail wetsuits made for deep sea diving, so your armpit had a rash underneath it all the time. So then as time went on, I was in Pasadena, and I hadn't started surfing in Pasadena yet, but the Holmquist boys, these Chuck, Mike, and Steve, they had an older brother named Richard who had a balsa surfboard, and when he wasn't looking, we would touch it and worship it, and all three of those guys became surfers, so we all became surfers. And then in 1960, I moved to Corona, California, and wanted to surf. And, you know, people would take me to the beach, and I bought a Dale Velzy balsa wood surfboard from my future brother-in-law and great surfer, the guy that taught me how to surf, Bruce Bett. And I don't even know if I ever stood up on that surfboard. It was a funky, one of Velzy's rejects. And I can remember being at the north side of San Clemente Pier, in the kind of toward the evening, and the glass off, and just floundering in the shore break, just purling and just eating shit, going straight pearl diving down for Davy Jones' locker. And there was a surfer girl out there that was built like Betty Boop named Linda Merrill. And God, she was so graceful and so smooth. So I kind of learned smooth grace by watching Linda Merrill surf, because she was so good. And then I bought a Wardy surfboard for $115, $16, $17 from Fly. And they had their surf shop there at Laguna, kind of right where the sewage thing is now. Not sewage, but the runoff zone is now. I took to it like immediately. I figured it out immediately, and I got good really fast. And and it just made sense to me. And I was walking down the hall at school, I'd be dragging my hand on the wall, imagining I was surfing. I mean, even when I was skateboarding, a funky skateboard that I made, I was surfing. The great Skitch Hitchcock tells me I may have had the first fiberglass surfboard. I took some what do you call it, plywood, and I made it because it would snap so I glassed it, and I took a skate, took it apart, a metal skate, glassed the fiberglass the plywood, the 1/4-inch plywood, so it had a lot of flexibility, but it didn't break, and would just skateboard, practicing surfing moves, and that's kind of how I got started, surfing. And then I hit Doheny, and 60, 61 I was at Doheny, and super crowded. Most of the guys out in the water were complete Hobie Hobie team jerks, shoulder hoppers, arrogant, real not friendly at all. The spirit of aloha did not exist. And that's when I first saw Phil Edwards. He had already quit surfing, and there were tandem contests back then at Doheny, and paddling contests, and that's when I first ran into Corky Carroll. I never had any problems with Corky. I remember one time him and I were out at first spot kind of alone, and he liked to go left and I liked to go right, and we both took off, and effortlessly, didn't even look at each other, took off at the same time and kind of did a go behind on each other, so that he was able to go left and I was able to go right, even though we weren't in that position. So I surfed with Corky through the years, and the last time I surfed with Corky was in the late 90s, and on a huge day at church, and I had the perfect surfboard for it, and I was just dicking every wave. I was getting every one of them, couple 3, 4 foot overhead. It was one of those once every 4 or 5 year swells was coming through, super high tide.